You have a Croton, it's looking a little sad, you don't know what's wrong with it, you're trying to do so many things to get it going, but it's just not doing anything. Well, in this video, we're gonna problem solve that Croton and see, can we get it from looking sad to looking happy? Hey everyone, this is Jaleesa from Green Mable. We help people beautify residential and commercial spaces with lovely things called plants. If this is your first time here, welcome. I am so happy you could have chosen anyone to watch on YouTube, but you're here and I appreciate you. Today we're gonna talk about why the Croton is not growing. All right, so Crotons and I have been around the block a few times. I have 4 Crotons. I have 4 Crotons and I just like to get them and keep them, and every now and then I have some trouble with them. From what I've heard on YouTube, if this is true, that Crotons are really problematic plants. Have you experienced this? Well, I hope that this video can help you problem solve your Croton and help your Croton become happier and healthier. So one of the first things you want to look at when it comes to Crotons, if your Croton is looking sad, you'll want to consider the light source. How much light is your Croton getting? What direction of the window do you have this Croton in? Do you have it in a north-facing room? Do you have it in an east or south-facing room? Is there obstruction if there is supposed to be direct sunlight coming in? Is there a tree in the way? Is there an awning? Is there some other kind of obstruction that is keeping your plant from getting the right amount of sunlight that it should receive? Are you not opening your blinds enough? These are some things you want to consider when it comes to why isn't my plant thriving? Why isn't my plant healthy? Sunlight is one of the biggest factors in the health of a Croton because these guys thrive off of sunlight. In fact, the beautiful leaves that you see, the beautiful colors, those are generated from the sun. If a Croton is not getting the right amount of sunlight that it needs, the leaves are going to be green and they're going to have less of the color variation. The next thing you want to consider when it comes to, is my Croton struggling? Why is it struggling? Is the right amount of humidity. When your Croton is indoors, sometimes our homes do not have adequate amount of humidity. Crotons are tropical plants and they thrive off of humid environments. So if you live around the Gulf Coast or in Florida, you can keep a Croton outside most of the year, maybe with the exception of winter, and the Croton is going to do well. It's going to thrive because the Gulf and the East Coast is very humid. However, if you're in a drier spot, a drier place in the nation or around the world, then you'll want to make up for that lack of humidity. And in the home, sometimes our homes do not have the adequate amount of humidity in the air, so we can supplement that with using a humidifier. I've been asked before, does a diffuser work just as well? It won't work as well as a humidifier, but it is a good option. And what you also want to keep in mind is to avoid using essential oils in that diffuser should you have it running near your Croton, because you don't want like some of the essential oils to get on the plant. I'm not really sure what would happen, but I don't think that that is a good idea if you're using a diffuser for just the purposes of humidity. The next thing you want to consider is your Croton. The next thing you want to consider is the amount of water. Is your Croton thirsty? Is it dropping leaves because it's thirsty, or is it dropping leaves because it's not getting enough light? So moisture is a big thing with Crotons. You do want the soil to dry out between the waterings. You want to check your Croton for dry soil. If it's really dry, really compact, then it could be a chance that it's dried out. Now indoors, you'll want to place these Crotons as close to a south-facing window if you are probably in zone, I want to say 8 and above. You'll want to place it in a south-facing room. That would be more ideal. If you're in zones 9 and up or lower, whichever one you want to call it, 9 and 10, then an east or west facing room would be more ideal. This video is only going to cover indoor care for crotons, because when a croton is outdoors, sometimes these things don't necessarily apply, because the amount of outdoor light is so much greater than indoor light, even in the shade. So I will do another video come spring, or if you're looking at this in the spring or in the summer, then I'll look for that video somewhere up here. Something you want to consider with crotons, also with indoor care, if the leaves are dropping, have you fertilized or over fertilized your croton? During the growing season, crotons will accept fertilizer and it will give them the nutrients that it needs to grow. It will give the roots the nutrients it needs to grow. However, during the off season, like the fall and winter, if you're up in further northern regions, adding the fertilizer is going to do more harm than good. So it's going to be more food than the plant is really able to absorb, because it's outside of the growing season and it's not really able to do as much photosynthesis and generate as much energy from the sun, because the amount of sunlight is reduced. Now, what I also want to mention with sunlight and indoor care is you'll want to make sure that it's getting at least 3 to 4 hours of sunlight, sun rays hitting the leaves. Now, I was able to keep this croton alive, doing okay in a north facing room for a temporary amount of time, but it's really not ideal. If you have a north facing room and you have a croton, it's just not going to be ideal for that plant. And as soon as it's spring or summer, you'll want to move that thing outside as soon as possible, that the plant is able to receive and do well outdoors. So once it's about once the temperatures outside are above 50 degrees, then you'll want to go ahead and move your croton outdoors. But I do want to say that the crotons tend to do better above 60 degrees, but they will do okay outside in 50-degree weather. Now let's talk a little bit more about humidity. So when I have my humidifier running for these, I turn the humidifier on low, because it's generally able to still put out enough moisture to the croton without it having to be on high. High sometimes is going to really drench your leaves. Unless your croton is really thirsty, you'll just want to place it on low, and that way the leaves will be able to slowly absorb the water that's coming in, and they'll be really happy. They'll really be happy with you when you give them the right amount of humidity. The next thing you want to consider is the type of pot that you have. So I have this one in this little self-watering pot, and you can notice this little spout right here. If I wanted to water the plant, I could water it right here and it would receive the water from the root, or I could water it from the top in a traditional way. So in either condition, in either circumstance, it's going to work just fine. I just like these little self-watering pots, because most of the time I do water it at the top, but I like these because when I really drench it with water, I have the ability to pour out the water down here. And so that's what I really like the most about these pots. You'll want to have your croton in a good draining pot. If you have a pot and it doesn't have drainage holes, place your croton in a nursery pot. You can get a nursery pot at any major retailer for probably $1 or less, because they're really cheap. And you can place the croton in that pot, and then place that nursery pot in a pot that doesn't have the drainage holes, if that makes sense. So whenever you take your croton to water it, you take it out with the nursery pot, you water it, allow it to drain out, and then place it back in that pot that doesn't have drainage holes. So that way your plant is already drained, and it's not going to suffer root rot from being in a pot that does not have adequate drainage. The next thing you'll want to think about when considering why isn't your croton growing properly is the soil. Is the soil too old? Is the soil adequate enough? Maybe the croton was growing at one time and now it's not. Well, if your croton is indoor and you're not really able to fertilize the soil during the off seasons, then try to keep an eye on your croton as much as possible. If your croton is not responding well, you think your soil is too old, it's not doing that great, what you can do instead of fertilizing it in a kind of a bad growing season, which is fall or winter, is not really a good time for repotting and changing soil and fertilizer. What you can do instead is you can top off that soil with some new soil. By adding soil at the top, it's going to give your plant kind of like a more slow release fertilizer than direct fertilization, which could be more harsh, and especially during the non-growing seasons, if your croton is kind of struggling and you don't really know what to do, the soil adding on top could really just be a gentle way to help the plant get a little bit of food into the plant. Since a lot of soil already has a little bit of fertilizer in it, some does, some doesn't. But if you choose to use a soil base that has fertilizer in it, then you can just add some gently at the top and then water it, and then the soil, some of the soil will absorb into the older soil. The new soil will absorb into the older soil some, and it will give a little bit of a boost to your plant. Before I forget to mention this, do not put your croton on the floor. Always, always put your croton on a stand. What happens when you place plants on the floor, a lot of times that are smaller plants or plants that aren't really big, is unfortunately spider mites can get to them. And that's a whole nother video. I will have a whole nother video on that. But you'll want to always place your croton on a stand to keep it away from anything crawling on the floor. Now, as far as the temperature in your home is also a concern. You don't want to allow your croton to be in a room that isn't getting any heat. Now, gas heat can dry out plants. Sometimes winter is hard on plants. So if you lose a leaf or two during the non-growing seasons, try not to make such a big deal out of it, or try not to let it worry you too much, because it's normal for them to kind of shed a leaf or two during this time in order to make room for new growth, which will eventually come in the spring. So now let's wrap this thing up. My best care tips for getting your croton happier and healthier from a smaller state is to be sure to place your croton as close to a window with very good sun exposure as possible. The second tip is to make sure you have very good humidity. Run a humidifier every couple of days near your croton. That is a good way to ensure that your plant is getting some humidity that helps it to thrive and be healthier. Next tip is temperature. Be sure that the temperature in your home is friendly. If it's cool outside, if it's cold, you'll want to try to avoid drafts hitting this plant. You'll want to try to keep it warm as possible. And last but not least, show your croton some TLC. Give her some looks. Let her know that you love her. Talk to her. You know, be a sweet parent. Like, hey, you're my little baby, and I know that you can grow and bounce back. You'll be surprised what works. So these are my tips to helping your croton recover if it's sad, or if it's in a sad state and it's shed a few leaves, you're concerned, you're not sure what to do. I hope that this helps. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that this video was helpful to you. If you are not already subscribed, what are you waiting on? I would love to have you a part of this Green Mable plant loving family. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Jaleesa with Green Mable. Bye now.